The wind howled like a living beast, hurling sharp crystals of snow against the windows of the small wooden house at the edge of the town. Inside, a frail old woman named Mrs. Carter sat by her fireplace, clutching her shawl tightly around her shoulders. At 76, storms no longer scared her, but the loneliness did. With her husband gone and her children scattered across states, nights like this stretched endlessly. The blizzard outside was merciless. The road that passed her home had vanished beneath mountains of snow, and power lines groaned under its weight. Mrs. Carter poured herself a cup of tea and whispered to the silence. Another long night. She had no idea how quickly that silence was about to be broken. The roar came first low, steady, and growing louder. Not the groan of wind, but engines. Heavy motorcycles fighting their way through the storm. She leaned closer to the frosted window, squinting into the white blur. One by one, headlights emerged like ghostly orbs, moving slowly, carefully, until they stopped outside her gate. 15 figures dismounted, their leather jackets and bandanas now coated in ice. Their boots crunched in the snow as they huddled together, shivering. They looked rough, intimidating even, but their movements betrayed exhaustion. One of them stepped forward, his beard crusted with snow, and knocked firmly on her door. Mrs. Carter's heart raced. Strangers at night in a blizzard, 15 of them. Every warning her neighbors ever gave about those bikers flashed in her mind. But then she saw it, the desperation in their eyes, the way their hands trembled not from anger but from cold. She cracked open the door. "What is it you need?" Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "Ma'am," the man said, almost apologetically, We've been riding for hours. The storm caught us. We've nowhere to go." Her gaze swept over the group. Their clothes were soaked, their lips blue, their bodies swaying from exhaustion. She could almost feel the chill radiating off them. Fear lingered in her chest, but something stronger rose to the surface: compassion. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. The bikers exchanged startled glances, as though they couldn't believe her words. Slowly, gratefully, they filed inside. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them, melting snow from their shoulders. Mrs. Carter fetched blankets, pots, and her last loaves of bread. For the first time in years, her small home filled with voices, laughter, and life. And though she didn't yet know it, this single act of kindness would ripple far beyond her walls. The living room looked nothing like it usually did. Boots crowded the mat, wet jackets hung over chairs, and steam rose from the fireplace as snow dripped onto the rug. Mrs. Carter moved slowly among her unexpected guests, setting out mismatched mugs of tea and ladling hot soup from the pot she had quickly put on the stove. The bikers, once so intimidating outside in the storm, now looked more like weary travelers. Some cupped their hands around steaming mugs, their shoulders finally relaxing. One young rider leaned back with his eyes closed, letting the fire thaw the frost from his beard. Another quietly thanked Mrs. Carter as she handed him bread. At first, the room was awkwardly quiet. 15 men, most strangers to kindness, didn't quite know what to say to the old woman who had opened her door without hesitation. But then, slowly, conversation sparked. "You live here alone?" one of them asked gently, careful not to sound prying. Mrs. Carter nodded. "It's been just me for a long time. I wasn't expecting company on a night like this." A ripple of guilty laughter passed through the group. "Neither were we," another said, rubbing his frozen hands together. As the evening wore on, their rough exteriors seemed to soften. They began telling stories where they had been riding, the towns they had passed through, the families some had left behind. To her surprise, Mrs. Carter found herself laughing at their jokes, her small home echoing with warmth it hadn't known in years. Still, a part of her remained cautious. Every so often she studied them, faces lined by hard roads, eyes carrying shadows of old mistakes. Yet, beneath the tattoos and leather, she saw something else: gratitude. Pure, unguarded gratitude. When the storm howled louder and the windows rattled, one of the younger bikers quietly stood and placed a log on the fire. "Can't let it burn out," he murmured, as though he belonged there. Another gently insisted on washing the mugs after tea. The small gestures stirred something in Mrs. Carter's chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time: the comfort of being cared for. By midnight, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Blankets lay scattered across the floor where the men settled in for the night, their snores blending with the crackle of the fire. Mrs. Carter sat in her rocking chair, watching them. She realized then that, for the first time in many winters, she wasn't alone. And though she couldn't explain why, she felt a quiet certainty that this storm had brought these strangers to her for a reason. The storm had finally eased when dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in soft gold. Mrs. Carter awoke to the smell of fresh coffee, a scent she hadn't expected in her own kitchen. Blinking in surprise, she shuffled in her slippers and found two of the bikers bustling quietly near her stove. "Morning, ma'am," one said with a sheepish smile. "Hope you don't mind. We figured you could use a break after last night." She chuckled, half in disbelief, half in warmth. "Well, that's a first guest cooking in my house." Around her living room, the others were already stirring. Some folded blankets neatly, others stacked wood by the fireplace. The transformation startled her. These men, who had entered her home like wild winds, now moved with the care of sons trying not to wake their mother. When breakfast was served, the bikers gathered around her small table, their broad shoulders hunched respectfully so they wouldn't crowd her. Between bites of eggs and toast, they spoke of the road ahead. Some planned to ride home, others had business in distant towns. Yet, not one seemed eager to leave the warmth of this place or the quiet kindness of the woman who had sheltered them. It was then that the oldest among them, a gray-bearded man with a deep voice, cleared his throat. "You gave us more than shelter last night, ma'am. You reminded us that not everyone sees us as trouble." Mrs. Carter's eyes softened. "And you reminded me I'm not as alone as I thought." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. When the bikers finally stepped outside, they paused in silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried under snow. But that wasn't what made Mrs. Carter gasp. The sight that froze her breath was the line of motorcycles stretching far beyond her porch. Not 15, but dozens. Scores of them, shining in the morning light. More bikers had arrived during the night, alerted by calls and messages from the original group. 100 bikes, lined in rows, engines quiet but presence undeniable. Mrs. Carter stood at her doorway, speechless, as helmeted men and women dismounted to greet her. A sea of leather jackets and chrome had gathered in honor of the kindness of one frail, elderly woman. Her small home had become the heart of something extraordinary. The chill of the morning air wrapped around Mrs. Carter as she stood in awe of the endless line of motorcycles. Her porch, once a quiet resting place, had turned into a gathering ground for a brotherhood she never imagined would come to her doorstep. One by one, the new arrivals approached her. Helmets were lifted, gloves removed, and calloused hands extended in gratitude. Each biker had the same message: "We heard what you did, ma'am. We couldn't let it go unnoticed." The gray-bearded rider from the night before stepped forward, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Ma'am, you gave us shelter when no one else would have. You treated us like people, not problems. That kind of kindness deserves to be repaid." Mrs. Carter shook her head, overwhelmed. "I didn't do anything special. You were cold, and I had a warm fire. That's all." But the bikers wouldn't have it dismissed so easily. From the crowd, someone wheeled forward a brand new generator, still wrapped in packaging. Another brought a stack of firewood, taller than Mrs. Carter herself. Groceries appeared, bags of fruit, meat, flour, and even treats she hadn't splurged on in years. Every rider seemed to have brought something, large or small, a token of thanks. Her eyes welled with tears. "You don't have to do this." "Really, a young rider interrupted gently. "Maybe we don't have to. But we want to. Because people like you remind us why we ride together, why we look out for one another. And now, we look out for you." The group cheered in agreement, the sound rolling through the snowy valley like thunder. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, peeked from their windows and doors. They saw the same sight Mrs. Carter did, her small home transformed into a beacon of community. Children from nearby houses crept closer, marveling at the polished bikes and the unlikely friendship forming before their eyes. One little boy asked shyly, "Are you all superheroes?" The bikers laughed, but one knelt down and replied, "Nah, kid. The real hero is that lady over there." All eyes turned back to Mrs. Carter, who pressed her trembling hands to her chest. For the first time in many years, she felt something bloom inside her that the winter cold couldn't touch. Belonging. She hadn't just given shelter. She had opened the door to a family she never knew she needed. The snow had stopped, leaving the valley wrapped in a soft, glittering blanket of white. The rumble of engines eventually faded as many bikers departed, but the warmth they left behind lingered far stronger than the fire in Mrs. Carter's hearth. Her small home, once quiet and often lonely, now felt touched by something greater. The groceries stacked neatly in her kitchen, the firewood piled by her shed, and the generator humming softly on her porch, all reminders that kindness had a way of multiplying. Later that afternoon, a knock echoed at her door. It was the gray-bearded rider again, holding a framed photograph. Inside it was a picture taken that morning, Mrs. Carter standing on her porch with the sea of bikers behind her, their smiles fierce and proud despite the cold. "This is for you," he said, his voice softer than before. "So you'll never forget that one act of kindness can ripple farther than you know." Her wrinkled hands trembled as she accepted the gift. "I'll treasure it," she whispered. Word of the night spread quickly. Within days, neighbors who once kept to themselves stopped by with pies, blankets, and stories. Children would run up her walkway to peek at the photograph, listening wide-eyed as she told them about the storm, the knock at midnight, and the night her home became a refuge. Weeks later, the bikers returned not because of a storm, but because her house had become a meeting point, a symbol. What began as an act of desperation for shelter had grown into a tradition. Her cabin was now a place where riders gathered, neighbors mingled, and the lonely found company. One evening, sitting by her fire with her new friends crowded around, Mrs. Carter realized the truth. She hadn't just changed their night. She had changed her life and theirs. Her home was no longer a place of silence. It had become a sanctuary. And though the snow would always return with winter, she knew now that so would they. Because kindness, once sown, never fades, it only grows.